Here we are. Welcome everybody to our Bible study. We're in Genesis chapter 21 tonight. However, it's really important we do some review tonight. Because when we go through this, there's going to be some stories that are going to sound very familiar. But this is a very important night. And something very important is going to happen. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is I want to memorize 3 names. And I'm going to call them the patriarchs. All right? But we need to memorize these 3 names. These are the 3 patriarchs. Patriarch meaning the fathers. We know one of them. We've been studying about him for a while. And his name is? Abraham. His son's name is?
Isaac.
And his son's name is? Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the 3 patriarchs. Very important to the story in Genesis and to God's promises to Abraham. So we will be studying a little bit more about that. So tonight, we do get to see the fulfillment of a long-awaited promise to Abraham and Sarah. And that big, long-awaited promise to Abraham and Sarah is the birth of Isaac. The birth of Isaac. In the Hebrew, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. In the Hebrew. All right. So, but before we get into that, we do need to remember that Abraham has a son. Turn back to chapter 16. This is unusual for us. Normally when we do our review, we usually just do the chapter before. But for tonight, we're going to need to go a little further back. We need to go back to chapter 16. But the old saying is, if you're in the right Bible, it's page 29. That's an old pastor's joke. All right, so in chapter 16, in verse 1, it went like this. Now Sarai, remember that was her name before God changed it. Abram's wife, remember that was his name before it was changed, had borne him no children. But Sarai had an Egyptian maidservant named what? Hagar. Remember we said nobody names their daughters Hagar anymore. Gosh, what a name, Hagar. And in fact, the only thing I can remember was there's a comic with a Viking named Hagar. That's all I remember. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
All right.
I think so.
So Hagar is the Egyptian maidservant to Sarai. So she says to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Remember, God had already promised them that they would have a child through Sarah. Right? And both Abram and Sarai laugh. And we've talked about the name Isaac. Yitzhak. It's actually Hebrew for laughter. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. That was a mistake. Okay, but even though we make mistakes, God can still bless us and use the things that we do wrong for his glory. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. And she blames him. But he's at fault, though. He's supposed to be leading. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. So your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so Hagar fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was in the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And the angel of the Lord said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. This is the same promise made to Abram. Your descendants will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now with child, and you will have a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery. All right? Again, this is ancient Hebrew, but it can be understood that this is sort of a pun. The word Ishmael sort of means God hears. God bless you. Okay, here we go.
God bless you.
I got it in first. Now, Ishmael will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. That's a prophecy. Hagar gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called, near where she was at, Beer Lahai. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Alrighty. Then the next chapter talks about a surgical procedure that God tells Abram to use on boys to mark how they're set aside for God. And that is, how many days after birth is it to be done? 8 days. 8 days. That's when the bris, that's the Jewish term, is used. The bris is done. So that's what we read about in chapter 17. We also read about the patriarch and matriarchs laughing about the idea. 18 is where we see the 3 visitors coming. And there was something very, very special about one of the 3 visitors.
Jesus.
We believe it was Jesus, pre-incarnate, because it continually calls him the Lord. Verse 1, chapter 18, verse 1. The Lord appeared to Abram near the great trees of Mamre. Now he had 2 men with him. We believe those men to be angels. All right. So now this is a story about Abram interacting with the Lord. The Lord renames him Abraham, meaning the father of nations. And they had this debate. Mind you, the 2 angels have already gone on ahead. They're heading towards Sodom. And Abraham has this debate with the Lord. Do you remember the debate?
Yes.
What was the debate?
Father for his nephew's
If there's
wife.
50.
Yeah, there's 50 men. Will you still destroy the city? And the Lord says, no, for 50 I will not. And then Abraham says, but 40. No, 45, right? If there's 5 less, right? And works his way on down to 10. Bargaining with the Lord because he's trying to protect his nephew and his nephew's family. All right. So the 2 men go on to Sodom. It's one of the darkest stories in the Bible. What happens in Sodom?
Everything evil.
Everything evil. I think that's enough for now, okay? Everything possibly evil. There's a reason why the term Sodom means sodomy today. That's where we get the term sodomy. Sodomy happens down there. It's very ugly. And Lot, even though the Bible calls him a righteous man, makes some very, very bad decisions also. And but as a result, the angels still protect Lot and his family, tell them to flee. All right? And so Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters do leave the city. And they go out. And what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah? Completely destroyed. Completely destroyed. And then Abraham sees all that has happened and then takes everything he has, all his family and stuff in verse 20, and he heads out of that area. He deals with a king named Abimelech, who's the king of the area, pulls an old stunt to protect his wife, calling her again his sister, which is technically true, but not actually. And then Abimelech hears from God. Because Abimelech, the Bible tells us, fears God. He knows God. And makes peace with Abraham. So now we're up to chapter 21. So there is a lot happening. But we got to stick with this, though. We got to stick with these 3 names, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because it's based on these 3 men, all right, that in many ways the rest of the Bible is written. Okay. So here, we're in Genesis chapter 21, and I'll begin reading in verse 1. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was how many days old?
8 days.
All right. Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. That's old.
Yes.
All right? I mean, he's been collecting Medicare now for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me, as we just did. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. It's funny that she says that, because God himself said it a number of times. Verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. That's the reason why we went all the way back to chapter 16 tonight, just to remember the story. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation, also because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent them off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered into the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from the heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? This is Mike's favorite phrase. Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God is with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. We're in verse 22. At that time Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, say to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I had dug this well. So the place was called Beersheba, because the two men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. All right. So let's go back to verse 1. This is something that's been promised for a while now. This idea that Sarah would bear Abraham a son. This is a great question. Why did God wait so long? I mean, he could have done this a long, long time before this. I mean, decades. I mean, it's kind of tough making this lady wait until she's in her 90s to have a child. Testing faith.
And to prove that God's the one who did it.
And he can do it even in her old age. A very common prayer is, Lord, give me patience, right? And give it to me now. But really, the answer always is that is the way. The Bible talks a lot about waiting upon the Lord. He does things in his time. Even the answers to our prayers too often our answers to our prayers are, yes, but not now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So Sarah, and mind you, Sarah and Abraham really aren't waiting. Okay, they're taking shortcuts and doing all kinds of things to try to fulfill God's promise. So we're no different, and that's the funny thing about looking at this.
Had they given up already?
You think that's a possibility, don't you think?
She was like, Joshua, like, at this time he's gonna do this.
Do you think that when
She must have really forgot all about it.
when she gave him Hagar, does that sound like giving up? I think it does. You know, that when she decided, look, it's not going to work for me. Just go ahead and work through Hagar.
Yeah,
You know,
so
obviously,
she just figured it would be her.
right? And God's developing. And again, I just think this is a message to all of us.
Yeah.
Man, just remember, look, we're going to blow it. I guarantee it. It's just the nature of us.
Yeah,
You know, but it's okay. God forgives and still delivers.
that's true.
You know, as He does here, and that's constantly the story here, because the whole idea of Abraham multiple times saying to men that, you know, Sarah's not his wife, but his sister, so he won't get killed. And he puts Pharaoh in a hard place. He puts Abimelech in a hard place. We're going to read more about it. We're reading more about Abimelech tonight.
And
But-
he makes out like a bandit.
But this one changes tonight.
Yeah.
This one changes.
Trying
This
to
is
see
part
if You'll
two.
be my sister.
Part one is, you're right. He makes out like a bandit, like he did down in Egypt, and he's doing right here in Beersheba. All right, but this one changes tonight because it's really Abimelech part two, and we'll talk a little bit more about when we get there as well. Of course, the scriptures don't hesitate to talk about how old Abraham really was, all right, being 100 years old. There's the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. This is in verse 4. And then as a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant, the promise between God and Abraham, Abraham circumcises his son on the 8th day.
I thought that when they turned like 16 or 18 or something like that,
13,
13,
right?
that's when they get circumcised.
Nope, bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah?
Bar mitzvah. That's
Isn't
when they're
that-
presented as a man or as a woman. There's a bat mitzvah also.
But don't they do the same thing when they become 13?
Nope, it's already been done once. You don't need to do it again.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't grow back.
Yeah, I didn't know that they were 8 days old.
Nope, 8 days old is when they do the bris.
I thought they were 13 when it happened.
Nope,
No.
nope, 8 days.
Now Hagar's son didn't get circumcised, huh?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
In this case, Fred's right. He got circumcised. You can go back and look for it. But yeah, Ishmael gets circumcised. All the men had to be circumcised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, scary thought.
When that custom came in, though, some of the men were a lot older.
Yeah, a lot older.
Yeah.
You know, and so that makes it real interesting because we were talking about it.
Before that one.
We didn't know how much anesthesia they had in those days.
Before a war, too.
Yes, again to show whose side they were on.
Men circumcised, and
Yeah,
they were all in agonies, and that's when they attacked them,
yeah,
because they knew they weren't going to have the energy to fight.
because it's very sore. But in this story here, again, this is God. This is again Abraham respecting God and the promise that was made by circumcising him on the 8th day. This is verse 6. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." I just think it's a real funny thing that, again, every time this story is told, people laugh when they first hear it. Because again,
Well, it's funny that Abraham's 100 years old when
Yeah.
he's
and I
giving
think,
children.
and so Sarah's prophetic here, and I think throughout the millennia.
They should be laughing about Abraham, too. I mean, he's
Oh,
100
absolutely.
years
Well,
old.
he laughed. He was the first one to laugh. He laughed also. All right, now so this time of great joy, this wonderful, wonderful time, now turns to sorrow for someone else. In verse 8, the child grew. This is Isaac. The child grew and was weaned. All right, so he was old enough no longer to take the milk from his mother. And the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham had a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." So she's envious. She wants just her own Isaac to be involved with the inheritance. Remember, God has already made promises to Abraham about Ishmael. He's already made promises to Hagar about him. Look at verse 11. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. Ishmael's probably about 13 at this time. He's a teenager at the time when this is all beginning to happen.
Stand up for a few minutes.
Fred, you don't have to bother this.
Just go
Just
ahead.
go right ahead.
back.
Stretch those
Bother-
knees before they all fall asleep on you.
It's just beginning to bother me in my back.
Yep.
It's starting to bother me if I sit down for a long time.
I understand. So here now you can see that Abraham truly identifies with Ishmael as being his son. But God said, this is verse 12, but God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. This is the same thing he said to him before. He's talked about, don't worry about Ishmael. I'll take care of him. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, recognized, found, approved. A day of reckoning, a day when things will be made right. It is through Isaac. And then it'll be Jacob. And Jacob is going to have 12 sons, one of whom would be Joseph. Yeah, Joe. Isn't that cool? All right. And then work its way through until they eventually get to King David. And then through that line, work its way through until you get to Jesus. That's the line of reckoning, of being reckoned. This is that promise. Now, mind you, remember, if you take a look at your Bible, right? Okay, we're in this very, very thin part here, right? We're only into about 21 chapters of the first book. If you go way over to here, to the New Testament, that's where you find Jesus. So they're talking about Jesus here, and we really don't see his name or this reckoning thing till way, way, way later on. Because God is a God of promise. We just need to wait on him. All right. So we're down to verse 13. God speaking, I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation, also because he is your offspring. So God continues with his promise of making nations coming from Abraham. All right. Now we're going to talk about two. Now here's the first of two very, very tough things for Abraham and his sons. This one's going to be very tough. Abraham's going to send his son off to die. You can remember, you're in the desert. There's no Motel 6s. Okay? You had the...
They didn't leave the light on?
They didn't leave the light on for him. You're praying that there are wells. There aren't rivers running. All right? If there wasn't somebody out there who was already dug a well, okay, you can go for days and not find water. If you really want a good taste of what this life is like, watch the movie Lawrence of Arabia. Mm-hmm. All right? And watch them crossing the desert in that movie. It is a great, great example of what Hagar and Ishmael are being sent out on. Remember, too, there were also men in the area, crossing the area, the Bedouins. They can be dangerous. Abraham's sending his son off to die. I said this is the first time it's going to happen to him. Many of us know what happens also to the other son. What happens to the other son? What happens to Isaac? Exactly, right. And we'll read about that in chapter 22, the next chapter. So now look at Abraham. Now, there's another thing I got to keep putting out to you here. This is, again, I don't want to over-spiritualize this. God would do this to himself thousands of years later. And we'll talk a lot about this in chapter 22. What am I talking about? How will God do the same thing?
It's 40 days in the desert.
That's part of it, right? But what
Jesus died on the cross.
God sent his son to die. This is exactly, here it is, thousands of years before it happens. God is showing, all right, that he is willing to do something that he didn't require Abraham to do. Now, he set Abraham up to do it to see if he'd be faithful, and Abraham is, twice. All right? But this is, again, a precursor of what God will eventually do for all of us. So, in other words, he's leading by example. I'm just, again, to me, it's hard to overlook this, how serious God is about this. So this is verse 14. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. A bow shot, right? So an arrow, pulling it back on the bow, and letting it go and letting it fly about that far away. She couldn't watch her son die. Mind you, she's going to die right after him. I'm hard-pressed to think of a more devastating concept.
He wasn't that thrilled. He just had to be obedient to his wife. Because he used to play with that little boy before he got the other one.
He loved him. Loved him
Yeah.
dearly. Remember, he was his one and only son
Yeah.
until Isaac's born. And Isaac's a baby. All right?
That's tough.
This is a teenager. So he's been, like you said, he's been with this boy now for 13 years.
Yeah.
This is extremely devastating.
Sarah was the one that wasn't so nice.
Sarah has some issues, but she's there to protect Isaac. You know, again, a natural mother's perspective on things. And this is also deals with inheritance.
Even though it was her idea.
Yes, it was.
But still, she just pushed him aside. When theirs come along, she pushed the other one aside.
Right, right. And she's a matriarch. She's in the Hall of Faith. She's considered to be a great woman of God. Okay? In verse 17, God heard the boy crying. What's Ishmael supposedly, generally mean? God hears. Ishmael, right? God hears. God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. We see this all the time, right? I mean, you're probably getting tired of me pointing it out. All throughout the Bible, the number one admonition throughout the Bible is don't be afraid. Fear not. Okay. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up. Take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Why Egypt? She's Egyptian. All right, so she's continuing her line. Now, mind you, Ishmael's going to become a real tough character. All right, he's a tough guy. Okay, and so just keep that in mind. But this guy is really, really tough. But now God has fulfilled his promise again to her and to Abraham. Now remember the well. Okay, we're going to talk about a different well in a second, but remember this, this idea again about wells and how important they are at this time period. In verse 22, at that time, so while all this is happening, at that time, Abimelech, remember him? Okay, he's the king of the local region. And Philcol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Can I throw the word in again? I can put it in there. All right? Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely again with me or my children or my descendants. Yeah, we're in verse 23 of chapter 21. What am I talking about?
Where he Had his wife,
Yeah, before
he
he
made his wife his sister.
tricked them into
Yes,
thinking.
tricked
And so Abimelech takes Sarah into his harem, thinking that Sarah is a single lady. And God comes and tells Abimelech, you're going to die. All right? You're going to die if you don't straighten this mess out. So Abimelech, by the way, Abimelech feared God. So he's plugged in really well. He also recognizes that Abraham is something very special, someone very special to God. Wouldn't it be great if that people would see that in us? You know, if they saw in us that we were really special to God. So verse 23.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I gotta excuse myself.
It's quite all right, Fred. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anytime.
All right, Fred.
Anytime.
Thank you for the dinner and the Holy Bible.
See you real soon?
Yep.
All right, that'll be good.
Okay,
I
thanks.
catch you this week, Ted.
Okay. There's no rush.
All right.
Now swear to me to hear before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham's going to do just that. Abraham said, I swear it. Verse 25. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham, watch this, Mike. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs? In verse 30, Abraham replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. In other words, he's trying to prove that this truly is his well. That he's not just making it up. So that's the kind of again, these are ancient customs to be able to do stuff like that, to be able to show how things are made to be as far as an oath or a promise or a contract in doing these kind of things. Now we've been through this before. We've talked about numbers, and although I'm not a numerologist, I don't necessarily think there are magic things in these numbers. It's really interesting to watch these things pop up over and over again. We've been talking a lot about the number 3, right? The Bible uses the number 7 to indicate perfection. And 7 and 14 are inseparable throughout it. God is said in Revelation to have 7 spirits, depicted as 7 lampstands. The 7 candelabra, or the menorah, set on the tabernacle in Exodus and Deuteronomy, are homage to God's 7-fold spirit. Noah led the clean animals into the ark and set so 7 pairs of each species. The unclean animals were saved to the tune of 1 pair each. Joshua led the Israelites with the ark 7 times around Jericho. John the Baptist is how Matthew first refers to the man generally understood to be the last of the Old Testament prophets, who preaches according to the law of Moses and predicts the coming of the Messiah. John the Baptist has 14 letters, which is twice 7. Jesus the Christ has 14 letters. Okay, you can see I can get a little carried away with this. But it's kind of fun, just to watch how certain numbers pop up. And this is one of those times right now. But this is the idea of perfection. In verse 31, so that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. Verse 32, after the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. That's a bad name. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So again, a lot of things are happening. But ain't nothing like what's going to happen in the next chapter. I think it's, for those of us who've gone to church services a lot, it's probably one of the most popular chapters for a preacher to preach out of. Is Genesis chapter 22. Because of the direct tie you see in it to Jesus Christ. It's very rare that I recommend that you read it in advance. I strongly recommend you read it in advance. Because I'm actually going to spend a lot of time in the New Testament talking about it. Okay, any questions?
You mentioned from your notes about Noah and the unclean and the clean.
Right.
What's the difference?
Right. The idea is that there's a thing called kosher. And this is actually more in Deuteronomy. A kosher animal is one that has a split hoof and chew its cud.
Yes.
If it comes off the land. If it comes out of the sea, it has to have scales and fins. And if it comes out of the air, it can't be a bird of prey. But the idea here was that you want to be able to have animals that they could go ahead and sacrifice. First thing Noah does.
When I read that, I had a question about they were sent off the ark to procreate.
Yep.
And he took one of the clean beasts or animals and sacrificed him.
Yep.
But evidently, before he was sacrificed, he must have procreated with his mate, or he couldn't be sacrificed and then not have an offspring.
Right. Well, all the animals are covered, and then there were some extra ones on top of it. So in other words, the answer about did he just bring in a pair of all animals? No, he didn't. Actually brought some more.
Mm-hmm.
He brought more than just a pair.
Now, Jesus died at Easter, right?
Oh, okay. Now we got back up the truck. The term Easter is actually something that gets applied long afterwards. So the question is when did he die? And that's up for debate too. But the best way that most people could tell you when did he die? On the third day. I'm sorry, he was resurrected on the third day. So it's believed that he may have died on Friday and then was raised on Sunday. And then there are other people who teach that he died on Wednesday and then rose on the Sabbath, which would be Friday night or Saturday morning. But what you're just trying to find out what day?
No, more or less, because like it says he's sending his son early, which would be Jesus, to be
only man born to die.
Early, I mean, just a child, but yet he was a grown man when he died.
Right. Very good. So here's the idea of, without getting too much into it, because it's a great conversation.
Yeah.
Here is the Father sacrificing the Son.
Yeah.
That's the real key, and we're going to talk about this. So it's just interesting that this is how it works out. Yeah, again, if we were standing at the cross, at the foot of the cross, as Jews, knowing very much the story in Genesis chapter 22, of course they didn't call it that then. It's in the Torah. You can't help it. This is really, you'll start to hear the sign, the Twilight Zone thing. Do 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 do. Something's really strange here. Something's really strange. But a lot of folks, when we study this, should it be next week? All right, how God saves Isaac is extremely interesting. Remember, when we go from one chapter to the next, we really don't always know the time period, how much time has passed. So remember, right now, Isaac's what? A baby. But he's schlepping wood in chapter 22.
Yeah.
He's carrying wood for the sacrifice. I don't think he's a baby anymore.
No.
And I don't think he's like a 6-year-old. All right? So he's strong enough to take this old man and pin him, right? All right? Again, I'm not giving anything away. This is a great thing for us to talk about some more, because you do want to read this and start thinking about this. Wait a minute.
So they were there a long time.
Yes. But just, wait a minute. Again, let's just go ahead and give him an age. Let's say he's 16. All right? So that makes Abraham 116. All right? If I'm a 16-year-old, am I going to let my 116-year-old father tie me to a pile of wood It's just not going to happen. So that says a lot about Isaac, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Obedient.
We're going to see something very powerful happen. Hence the reason why preachers love Genesis chapter 22.
You started from the beginning?
We started in Genesis chapter 1.
Yeah.
So you did all the creation part?
Of course.
Well, I was just reading that early this morning, I just had a question to ask. There's a part that talks about after he did all the stars and everything, then it said, and he created them in generations. And that word generation stuck in my mind, and I said, generations? It said in the generations of all the creations that he did, it was like in the last part, before he did Adam, it said in the generations were, and I was thinking about generations is like a gap between something. So that shows that the creations were like, there wasn't like, we slept and the next day was the third day. It was like a gap, because it says, 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So I was in my mind, I'm not saying it was right, but I was just looking at that word generation and looking at that big gap that must have been between stars being created and the moon created. Everything wasn't like crushed and every day like we sleep and wake up. It was a big gap.
Sure, you're gonna need to show me that because I don't remember that.
I was just reading it this morning.
Okay.
That word generation, it was stuck in my mind. I said, how could it be? Is it after he created and then it's a generation? That's as far as I got.
Okay.
So they also, in different, what's your version of the Bible? Because this one here is the...
You're in an NIV. This is what I have.
No, but it'll still have a word pertaining to it.
Yeah, I'll still have a word pertaining to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created.
Oh, there it is, chapter 2, verse 4.
Very good. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and no shrub of the field had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to work the ground, but streams came up from the earth and water. The Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his bosom. Now the Lord had planted a garden. Okay.
Now, see, your word didn't say that. This one says, these are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created.
All right.
That's the
and that was in verse 4?
Verse 4 of chapter 2.
Yeah, and mine says this is the account of the heavens and the earth. How account. Or the story, or the all right.
So I was trying to see when it's that word generation.
Well, it's ancient. It's an ancient language, so they're always looking for a way to the best word for it. It's really hard to figure that out.
Yeah, and my version's NASB, the New American Standard, and mine says this is the account.
See, that's what he has too.
Of the heavens and the earth when they were.
Yeah, so I have it, talking about how this is the beginning of the record.
Oh, okay.
So when they so you can say this is the record of the heavens, but I can still see generations using the word generations, because of the fact that they're still talking about a history.
Right.
But that's a good question.
Because I was wondering how space was between it.
Right.
That he did everything, because his time is not like our time.
Right.
That's right.
Agreed.
That's right.
Absolutely true.
There must have been some long space between them when he did one thing
Yeah.
and the other.
Go ahead, Gail.
And my commentary says, when it refers to time, it means at the time.
Right.
So we're not going to know till we get to heaven whether it's a 24-hour day as we know it.
Remember, the sun and the moon hadn't been created, and they were already using this term.
Right.
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 Yeah. And the word yom is the Hebrew word for day, and but it also can be said in the period. So, and again, on one side, a preacher will talk about, nope, I'm sticking right with the literal interpretation.
I was reading it myself. I never.
I'm glad you are.
I just saw it this morning.
I'm glad you are.
Stuck out of my head.
And when we were talking about this back then, I'm saying, I don't really know. I don't know exactly for certain. When it says things like that, I stick with the literal until I'm told I have some reason to believe otherwise.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm going to say it's a literal day.
All right.
But I could be wrong.
Dateless past.
Yep. It could be a dateless past.
That's true.
There's a lot of things this could be, but key thing for me is, in the beginning, God. All right? Mike's telling me I got to turn it off.
No, you don't have to.
You're pointing right at him, Mike.
No,
But then
I thought
it
you had
has a
already
little
turned it off.
connotation.
I'm sorry.
Psalms 90, verse 1 and 2. That that little backup scripture that goes with it.
Yeah.
Yep,
And
yep.
that one says, Lord, that has been our dwelling place in all generations.
Yep.
And see, still like in all the times.
Yeah, and all the,
Again,
or according to
bring it
all the
back.
records. Or it could have been, in all the records you have been,
It's still
in all the accounts. Right, very good.
interesting.
It is interesting, you know, and again, it's like Gail says, we'll find out when we get to heaven.
Yeah.
All right, what was the deal here?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
That was all I just
Mark,
read that.
in my time, there was the new system of a created Jew or a converted Jew.
Mhm.
Are you a converted Jew?
Yeah, well, actually, I was raised knowing both. I was raised knowing both. So there wasn't a time that, you know, where I was totally in Judaism. So my father's a Gentile, my mother's is Jewish, and by rabbinic law, I am what my mother is. So I grew up knowing both sides. Makes a lot of fun.
But you know what I'm talking about? There was a period of time when that was a big thing,
Everybody.
about the converted Jew or something
Yeah,
like that.
well, first of all, the disciples were all converted Jews.
Yeah, that's not the word, not the right word, but
I know what the word is, and it's really not a good word. Really, really don't. No, completed.
oh. That's right, that's what the word is.
Completed. No, what are you talking about? You know, but I am. I'm a messianic Jew. I'm a Jewish believer that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah, that was the word,
Yeah.
messianic.
Oh, very good, perfect. I like that word. Anything else? Now, God bless everybody, and we'll talk to you real soon.
God bless us all.